Thank you very much, Peter. Yes, we're joined by Professor John Stremlau from the Department of International Relations at the University of Wits. Thank you for being with us, Professor. And let's pick up first with those protests and the fact that the country is so divided. Yesterday, Trump came in and he said, I'm going to be a president for all Americans, a softer victory speech than expected. Some people are saying maybe the campaigner will be different to the president. Do you believe that? And do you think this sort of the things that have been said, can the hurt be undone in any sort of way?
It'll take time, but you've got to remember that during the campaign, Donald Trump was the first presidential candidate in memory who questioned the integrity of the system and threatened violence throughout his stirring, passionate rallies and the like. And so it's ironic that they're now calling for the democratic process, which has worked for their advantage. And so there is a deep division in the country. His pious words on acceptance were welcome, but since he lied so thoroughly during the campaign, he was fact-free. We really have to see whether he can match the proposals with some action, and where are we? Because the Republicans for the last 8 years have opposed everything that Obama wanted to do, but they gave no alternatives. And so you're going to eliminate Obamacare. What are you going to replace it with? And what are you going to do for international affairs more generally, which of course redound to South Africa's interest as well?
And I guess now it comes down to real politics. So he talks about building a wall. Maybe he'll waver on that, maybe he won't. But how much power will he have as an individual within the U.S. democratic system?
Well, this is a real conundrum because the executive in the U.S. has to deal with the Congress on funding issues, but in foreign policy, it's really a lot of power. And they can do an awful lot. And he has never been tested in government. He's never served in the military or in government before. He's a blank sheet. We don't know what his ideas are. He has very few advisors that we know. He's got to staff up his new administration. And so at the moment, we really don't know what he will do. And one of the early signs that South Africa should be watching is if he delivers on his threat on the second day in office to go ahead and slap a currency manipulation claim against China, which would lead to a 45% tariff. That could set off a chain reaction of economic downturns and certainly destabilize markets and have a very chilling effect on...
Explain a bit more. What would that mean? Because it's, like everything, it's hard to tell what this will mean for emerging markets because maybe closer to Russia, but he's had some divisive talk against China.
Well, it is the fact that China and Mexico are the two early litmus tests, and he may prove to be a little more cautious. He has a lot of power as an executive, but he also has a lot of support now that the Republicans have controlled both houses of Congress. And don't forget, he's also going to make an early Supreme Court justice appointment, which will break the deadlock of 4-4 and give him court sympathy and if there are any challenges to the legality of what he's doing. So he's in a very strong position, but he's a man who has given no indication of any policy backgrounds or ideas, and so it's a blank slate, and yet there's a lot of things he could do.
Certainly not on Africa. That is one of the dark areas among many dark areas. But AGOA is what we're interested in, this preferential access to U.S. markets. Right. He's showing signs of wanting to protect America and put Americans first. But we are protected there by law. Can we at least say AGOA is going to last for a while?
Well, one would hope that till 2025 at least, and it was long negotiations, but he doesn't like these kind of concessional arrangements because he's a very kind of tough realist, zero-sum bargainer. He doesn't know the give and take of diplomacy for win-win, positive-sum bargaining, and his background in business has been in the same spirit. So his talk about the global economics is really very mercantilist, very nationalist, very old school traditional protectionist, which would lead to an economic disruption. Now, maybe he's meeting with Paul Ryan today, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, very pro-trade. His Vice President is pro-trade. There are those around him who could persuade him to go a little more cautiously. But if I was sitting in Pretoria right now, I'd be doing a lot of contingency planning and looking for other partners internationally that would be able to take some of the pressure off for the U.S. relationship, which is going to be a question mark.
And isn't this a bigger issue? Tell me if I'm oversimplifying, but the world for a while was inwardly focused, protecting their own markets. Then there seemed to be a consensus that openness was good. You have to accept exports from other nations, but you can also export. In your opinion, do you think, and this isn't only in America, Europe as well, is there a trend to go backwards?
Well, there does seem to be a rising disaffection with globalization, immigration, the assertion of nationalism. We've seen it in Europe, now we see it in the United States. Brexit is another example. We see some of that echoing down here in South Africa, xenophobia. But what Trump represents is a challenge to the whole post-World War II order in the security realm. He thinks U.S. pays too much burden on NATO. That's making very nervous in Europe. And then on the trading regimes, he also thinks that they should be reappraised because America first, America first. It's a very backward-looking and regressive kind of reactionary position that he's taken rhetorically. What he'll do in practice remains to be seen.
Okay, so you're not willing to make any predictions?
Well, it wouldn't be right. I would say trust but verify in the old Ronald Reagan terms, and I think it's important for South Africans, especially given things like climate change, which were mentioned in the briefing from New York, that we should be on guard here for things which could be collateral damage to us, as well as those that might be directed. He's said very little about Africa. He made a derogatory tweet months ago about South Africa being a mess. He's had no background here, and he doesn't have any African advisors that I know. His potential Secretary of State, Newt Gingrich, the crazy former Speaker of the House of Representatives, did get a PhD in Zaire, DRC studies in religion many years ago. He's the only guy that I can be aware of in his orbit that knows even where Africa is.
We're running out of time, but I want to ask you one last question. Does that then, in a way, vindicate the decision of South Africa to actually orientate away from the U.S. Closer to the east?
Well, the BRICS may be a counter to the U.S., but what worries me the most about the current South African foreign policy is it's lost its leadership role in Africa, and what it should be doing is promoting collective trading and greater integration within the continent.
All right, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Professor John Stremler from the Department of International Relations at Wits University. Thank you very much for your time. We take a short break.